All right, thank you. Thank you, folks. I'm impressed there are so many people here and that you're awake this morning, so gold star for you.
So early.
So early, but thank you for that. Thanks for showing up. All right, so we thought we'd start with introductions, just so you get to know us a little better before we get into the meat of the presentation. So hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm based here in Google, Ireland. I have a PhD in chemistry, thus my nickname, Dr. J. I've been at Google for 12 years, and I currently lead the SRE education team at Google. So we're a training team. We got some volunteers in the audience. It's a training team that focuses on ramping up new SREs at Google and on continuing education, production education, and SRE practices for the broader engineering community at Google. Also a part-time travel blogger if you need tips on what to do in Dublin, and happy to talk about any of my fun facts in the hallway track later.
And my name is JC van Winkel. I've been with Google almost 9 years. I've been on call for production monitoring for 6.5 years, but then I switched back to my old habit, namely teaching, and I have 30 years of experience. My responsibility is I'm the lead educator of SRE EDU.
All right, so now that we've got the intros out of the way, let's talk a bit about why training is actually important. So I think the folks in this room, the majority of you are SREs, will agree that becoming an SRE in the first place is, it's tricky. It's even just ramping up on a service for the first time, like there's a lot to learn. And there's the ins and outs of the production systems you're going to be managing, incident management best practices, et cetera, et cetera. So, some people think that training is about cramming as much information into people's brains as possible, setting up that proverbial fire hose of information. But really, no matter how much you tell people, they're really only going to retain a small amount, especially when you're giving information in a lecture format. So training is not about the fire hose of information. It's about believing in yourself. So, and this is true, like for adult learners, it's about building confidence, fighting imposter syndrome, and this is especially true for people that are new to a team. So we'll talk a little bit about how we've fostered that confidence and battle imposter syndrome as we go on. All right, let me talk a little bit about a brief history of the SRE education team at Google. So we've established that training is important. Now let's talk about the journey that we've undertaken at Google. So for many years, there was really no consistency, no reliability to the way that new SREs were ramped up. So this is the period of sort of grokking SRE the hard way. Then in 2014, people like JC and others formed what they dubbed the Secret Alliance for SRE Education. They talked about how can we improve the situation, how can we put a better standard in place for training SREs. So then, in 2015, that was when Google's SRE EDU team was born. So they convinced the powers that be to fund a small team and solve the problem. So 3 months later, we launched our SRE Orientation program. A year later, we launched some courses about going on call. And after that, we focused on how do we unlock silos of information across the organization, so focusing a little bit on ongoing education. And then after 2 years after our initial orientation launch, we actually did a complete overhaul, and that's going to be a focus of the talk today. And you'll see why as we go further into the talk. And more recently, we've been focusing on applying SRE principles to our training program, or SREing our SRE training program, so that we could free up more cycles to work on more value-added things. So, sound familiar? Like making tomorrow better than today is this key SRE principle. All right, continuum of training options. So this slide shows sort of different ways that you might train people, from lowest effort to highest effort, and again, effectiveness can potentially change accordingly. So if you think about it, so you've got sink or swim at the low end of the spectrum. So that means you just let people figure it out on their own with no guidance or support. Not great. You could do a self-study approach, which means you point people at relevant resources, and then they learn on their own, but they're ultimately in charge of consuming that material on their own. If your organization is small or growing more slowly, the buddy system actually works pretty well, like pairing up an experienced person with a less experienced person. And if you're growing a little faster, ad hoc classes or whiteboard sessions, they require more effort but can be more effective. And then a training program is at the high end of the spectrum. So this is, it has well thought out learning objectives and content to support those objectives. And you also have a consideration around offering the curriculum consistently on a scheduled basis. So a couple tips right off the bat. Avoid sink or swim if you value inclusivity. Adult learners have different preferred ways of learning. And sink or swim can breed stress, frustration, even attrition, and really can breed imposter syndrome. And then for the other options, I think it's important to consider the return on investment of the effort that you're investing. So, and some considerations. Are you a small or large organization? Are you growing rapidly? How experienced are the people that you're trying to train? So is more effort always better? No, just like with reliability considerations in the first place, 100% is never the right target for reliability. So if you think about an SRE principle in practice, you really want to do just enough to meet the needs of your students. You want to keep them happy, but not too happy. And you want to balance this effort versus results, considering the trade-offs. And I often quote this, I'm like, JC, we should stop polishing that diamond. So avoid polishing a diamond. And I actually also like to draw an analogy between the software development life cycle and building and running a training program. So in this talk, we're gonna discuss not just what we teach, but we're actually gonna talk about how we teach and deliver our program reliably. So just like with with the traditional software product, reliability is really the #1 feature, because if you don't deliver your training program in a reliable way, no one benefits from all the shiny content that you've created. So so look at the analogies, like the what are product features or training content, and then the how is how do you do this in a consistent and reliable way. Cool. All right, so now we're gonna talk a little bit about the service reliability hierarchy. This was originally formulated by Mikey Dickerson, former Google SRE, fixer of healthcare.gov in the US, former administrator of the US Digital Service. Like, Mikey's pretty awesome. So this service reliability hierarchy was originally included in the SRE book. And the hierarchy covers the elements that go into making a service reliable, from the most foundational things to the most advanced. So now let's talk about how to actually apply these SRE principles to a training program. So the elements of the service reliability hierarchy can actually be adapted to the training context. So I want to take a few minutes here to actually review the mapping at each level with some examples. Cool. So how to apply SRE principles to a training program. Let's start at the base of the pyramid. And at the base of the pyramid, we have monitoring. And just like when you're running a production service, if you without monitoring, you really have no way to tell whether what's happening with your system. So without monitoring, you have no way to tell if your training program is effective. And for a training team, the training program itself can be viewed analogously to the production service that's being supported. And think about what's important for a service. It's defining service level objectives for the team, and basing your monitoring on those SLOs. And for a training program, you could consider SLOs around things like coverage, what % of your target audience actually takes the training, response time, since we owe it to our students and our volunteers to get back to them and answer their questions in a timely manner. Another SLO target could be things like around student satisfaction or the delta in confidence that they report in surveys. But the TLDR is for a training program, monitoring and alerting is basically analogous to surveys and attendance tracking data. Cranking up the pyramid, we now have incident response. And incident response in the context of a training program, it's not as instantaneous, it's not as adrenaline rush type as you might have in supporting a production service or dealing with a production outage. So while teams would strive to resolve a production outage in minutes or hours, for a training incident, it might take weeks or months for something to unfold. So for example, if you have a survey result that comes in where certain questions are scored negatively, how likely are you to recommend this training to others? Was this worth my time? If someone is like, no, it was horrible, like that's, alert, that's a bad situation. It calls for investigation, calls for sort of declaring an incident to understand what was actually wrong. Because was it a curriculum issue, a logistics issue, an instructor issue, for example? So it's important to triage, mitigate, and resolve student experience issues. We want to drive improvements to the training program in ways that actually matter to your students. Cool, so next up we have postmortem and root causes analysis. So if issues arise and they're serious enough, you want to actually dig a little deeper and do some additional analysis. And again, as with SRE in general, blamelessness needs to be maintained at all times. No one should ever feel like their job is at stake if they make an honest mistake. And write a postmortem when there is an issue that significantly impacts the student experience. So just like when you're running a production service, postmortem action items should focus on eliminating entire classes of errors. And for example, if there's an incident around instructor quality, you might have an action item that revolves around upskilling your pool of instructors or giving the best instructors sort of first dibs on teaching time in an automated way. Sip of water. All right, testing and release. Let's talk about testing and release. So any new class materials that you develop should ideally be canaried with a small group with success criteria defined in advance. So for the test teaching session, you want to make it clear to the students, you're guinea pigs, like we'd like to get some feedback from you. Canaries, yep. And at the end of the time, like leave time for people to give you feedback at the end of the session. If the canary proves successful, pilot the class in production, so to speak, in one site, and if you're running in multiple locations, and then ultimately you can accelerate your rollout from there. Capacity planning. So this equates to scaling your operation in a training context. So capacity planning focuses on things like, how do you ensure that you have enough space to train everyone that actually needs to be trained? How do you get the best return on your investment for the program? If you have extra capacity, like free seats beyond your target audience, how do you fill those extra seats? Who gets priority in that case? And you also want to make sure that your location distribution and the timing of the training is actually appropriate given the number of people that you would like to train. You need to make sure you have enough facilitators to cover the load and that you have enough core team cycles to actually manage the operations and logistics. You don't want to burn out the core team. Development. So in a training context, this corresponds to curriculum design. And the SRE EDU team at Google, we started our orientation program by assessing what we thought every SRE needed to know in their second week on the job. And in many cases, as JC discovered, there were actually multiple slide decks covering the content, like forks of forks of forks. So do a survey of the materials, figure out the best of what's out there. And we launched a minimum viable curriculum based on that. So we could get feedback from students to drive improvements. And then from here, we worked with our instructional designer, Preston, on a new model for the curriculum, and then actually built a new and improved version from the ground up. So it's also important to point out that the development process involved both the educational materials, so things like slide decks, instructor guides, train the trainer decks, and actually building educational infrastructure. I'm not going to steal JC's thunder because he's going to tell you about that. And then the culmination of the training development process, or the SRE training reliability hierarchy, is the program. So our product, so to speak, is our training program. So you can think of our SRE EDU Orientation. It encompasses short lectures that give students just enough breadcrumbs to triage, mitigate, and resolve issues that are presented in hands-on exercises. We've got our SRE EDU infrastructure, which JC is going to talk about shortly, and this may arguably be the most important element of our product. Our product also includes the supporting documentation for instructors and operational components like mobilizing our volunteers and getting folks to the right place at the right time, giving out our SRE EDU branded swag, good stuff, and copies of the SRE book, for example. So one other thing we've learned, it's actually just as important to lock down your training materials to prevent forking. So just like the source code for a software product lives in a version-controlled code repo, think of your training materials in the same way. You want to understand what's canonical, like what's part of your product in production. All right, let's go back to the base of the pyramid. And what did our monitoring actually tell us? So we looked at the survey data that we had. We looked at our monitoring 6 to 12 months after launching our original SRE EDU program. And what you can see here is a key theme emerging. Our SREs really wanted a more hands-on education experience and not a lecture series. There was really this call for like learning by doing. So what do we do about it, JC?
Yeah, so one of the things that we learned is that people want much more hands-on and not just listening to people talk and be passive. It's very important, especially for SREs, that you instill confidence. And that is the most important part of our classes. Confidence and also SRE culture, the blamelessness and things like that. Setting this up, we also wanted to make sure that we give the students just enough information to be able to handle the hands-on and learn more by doing the hands-on. And it turns out that as students do that they learn actually not so much from the lecture they had. The lecture they had is just the catalyst to be able to let the students be able to go through the exercise. It's also necessary that they understand that as an SRE you're not alone, and it's okay to ask questions because we do that all the time. You're not on call alone. You can always rope in colleagues should that be needed. So, what did we do? We moved away from passive listening. No more walls of text and walls of slides, but actually things with hands-on. They are aiming at instilling confidence, really get people to get a feeling, I can do this. We want them to troubleshoot a real system. Now, of course, this cannot be Google Maps or Google Search because we want them to be able to bring things down and then hopefully back up again. So we had to build something for this purpose specifically. And as we have multiple exercises, at the first exercise, it's very much hand-holding and hinting. And then at the next exercise, the instructor takes a step back and does less hand-holding. And the next exercise, it's even more. And the last exercise is almost just the instructor sits over there, and if you have a question, you can wave and ask that question. So we give the students this confidence in this way. We have groups of 3 students that work on together on the problem, solving the problem that we give them. And we make sure that in that group of 3 students, there is a lot of diversity in experience. So we might have someone who has 20 years of experience doing system administration and coding and what have you. We might have a new grad, and we might have someone who has 3 years of experience. We put those 3 together, and the person with the least experience is sitting in the middle, driving the thing, and the others are more consulting. So, how do we do this? We wanted to build this product, this thing. It had to be something that is tangible, something that looks real. I mean, not something abstract like, yeah, this is a Bloom filter server, blah, 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 and no one really understands what it does. No, something where you can actually see that it works, or actually see that it does not work. It has to be real-world applicable, something that you can imagine. Of course, this is Google, so it has to be a distributed system, and distributed in Google ways. Applying Google's best practices that we teach. It must be an application that feels alive. So, yeah, we should make sure that even if the students do nothing, that traffic is happening, that it seems as if it actually does have users, even though it doesn't. And it must be breakable. And for that, I refer to the images there. There is a beautiful German word that's called Sollbruchstelle. If you look it up, it means predetermined breakage point. And this is something that we see in everyday life everywhere. I have 3 examples here. Stamps with perforations, chocolate bars that break at exactly that point. and the break-off knife, where you can break off the dull part and get to a new sharp. We see that in lots of places. So we had to build something that was breakable. And what was the end result? I'm just creating a little bit more of tension about what was it now that they built. So what was the end result after students go to this class? Well, the first time that we taught this, I asked a student, so tell me, what was the problem that you've just solved? And this person gave the answer in 4 very succinct sentences. Note, they didn't know anything about Google before. And I asked them after this answer, which was totally correct, so tell me, what would your yesterday self have thought if they had heard what you just said? And their eyes went big, their jaw dropped, and they said, I would not have understood a word of what I just said. And note that they did understand. This was not something where this person would not be able to reproduce it a week later, that it was something that was just like a list of words that you have to learn in French class or something. No, they really understood what the core of the problem was. And the only thing we gave them were a few breadcrumbs in a class, a 1-hour class, and then we gave them this exercise that culminated all of this. So, very nice. So we had to build this system, whatever it may be. To design and build this system, we did have some roadblocks or difficulties. You cannot just build it. You have to follow best practices. And best practices within Google are nowadays codified in frameworks where the thing is basically already built. The only thing you have to build is the plus function, and you have your addition service, including all the continuous integration and deployment and monitoring and the whole shebang. So we had to follow those best practices. And we knew that we needed these breakage points. So we made a list of 80 or so things that we have seen in the past in Google services that could break. We went to the people in SRE who actually built these frameworks and said, so which of these breakage things are plausible with the new frameworks? And they went through the list. No, the system won't allow you to do this. No, maybe. So we had 4 left or so. So we did that. Another problem is we cannot just have one of these things. So we actually need dozens, because it's possible that we run classes in all our 3 locations in parallel, and we might have 30 students in every location, so 3 times 10 is 30. So we need to have these things in parallel, and that is not common. We don't run 30 parallel instances of Google Maps, for example. Then we have better and better tools. For example, the alerting tool nowadays at Google will say something like, yeah, this and this happened. And by the way, a week ago that happened as well, and here's the postmortem that explains what happened then. We don't want the students to see that postmortem. Yeah. And actually, we do want that problem to happen again and again and again.
And 10-minute warning.
Yes.
Got it. Cool.
And then development. How do we develop all this? Well, it is impossible, we found out, to actually build this very fast. We needed volunteers. And we have Ohad here, who was a volunteer there. The advantage of having volunteers that you have knowledge about distributed systems, and it is distributed as well. One person knows a lot about this, another person knows a lot about that. You have a flexible workforce, but it takes longer because the volunteers have a day job as well. And the volunteers might think, what's in it for me? Well, they flex their skills, they get to do something that they don't normally do, and they get recognition. And actually, volunteering for things like this is in the job letter description at Google. So if they do volunteer for things like this, they actually do get rewards in performance review and things like that. So here is what we build. Yeah. Ta-da! a photo upload service. You can upload photos, you can look at photos, you can see what photos are there, you can add hashtags, and can search by hashtag. People who went to the SRE classroom yesterday, this is something that you might have built in the design yesterday. And the architecture of the product, well, something like this. The important parts are in green. We have a front end, which is a user interface server that does the UI stuff, HTML. We have a logic server that does all the business logic. We store photos in cloud storage, and we have metadata of the photos in Spanner. And these things all talk together and have wonderful opportunities for breakages. So how does this work in practice? Well, we also want to SRE our way around this. So we have as much automation as possible. For example, the names of the new hires pop up sometime. They come up in a spreadsheet, and these are automatically put in our learning system by our automation, also built by volunteers. We automatically assign classes and give proper production permissions to the people attending these classes. We have instructor automation where instructors who want to teach a specific class put their name in a spreadsheet, and then our code comes by and puts a hold in their calendar so they don't forget that they actually put their name on the list, and also at some point put it in the learning system. And then the breakages. We also have automation for the breakages. So these things that go down, they have to go down at a specific time. And this takes time because it is SLO based. So you make sure something breaks. The thing starts eating out of its SLO, and at some point, the alert has to go off. So what we do is 45 minutes before the thing needs to go off, our automation breaks the stacks, all of them, but puts a blanket silence, so a disablement of alerting in place. The moment the instructor is ready to have the students' pagers go off, types a command, the silence is removed, and bang, 10 pagers go off within a minute. And actually, we are on call for this because what if the system is not eating out of SLO fast enough? So we, the people on SRE EDU, get paged if the system isn't breaking bad enough.
Mind blown.
And the people, the students, are using actual Google tools to investigate and resolve.
All right, I'm mic'd up. All right, so what does our monitoring tell us now? What did the next generation of SREs actually think about these changes? So it worked, yay, spoiler. So we saw a significant increase in our Net Promoter Score and self-reported student confidence. We also saw a very positive shift in the momentum of the histogram of self-reported confidence in our survey results. So you can see here, like I was especially impressed by the 26 percentage point increase in the very likely to recommend category, and the again that shift in confidence, which is one of the more important elements. And just looking at a few sound bites, our students are clearly happier with the hands-on exercises. In fact, they're awesome, give us more, would love to have more of these. And I like the one on the right in red was actually someone very senior in our organization who actually took the time to go through the training, just as a refresher. It was the funnest week I've had this year. Overall, it made me feel more connected to production and the technology, which made me really happy. And that makes us happy. So the other cool thing is that SRE EDU Orientation V2, it's actually better instrumented for observability as well. So you've really got these concrete behaviors that are demonstrated, like use of a system diagram, diagnosing issues with SRE tools, annotating an outage, mitigating realistic production issues, and finding root causes and proposing solutions. So rather than just like you lecture at someone, do you get it? Yup, all good. Here you can actually see them putting these things into practice.
So what if you are a small company and you don't have Google's resources to build a whole stack times 30 and so on? Probably you will not have classes, but you will need actual hands-on, self-directed hands-on exercises. I have seen several companies that do this by creating virtual machines where people have to bring up the product that they sell and then run some script. and the thing breaks. And they have to find the problem of this breakage, and the confidence is there because they can always spin up a new virtual machine or run a script that unbreaks it and try again. This is very important. Note that you should make sure that the breakage is always plausible. It is not something that, what? It has to be, oh yeah, I understand how this could happen in practice. And that is what we have done as well.
There we go.
So, looking at instructional design principles for any size organization, make sure that you know your audience. What do you want them to do? What do you want them to stop doing? What kind of environment do they currently work in? Consider your culture. Bring your culture to them. Blamelessness, for example. Tell stories. Stories are important in our lives, and just a few words will immediately bring back the story. Think midnight, pumpkin, glass shoe,
yeah.
things like that. You immediately know what I mean.
Do they? Cinderella? Yeah.
Cinderella. Of course they do. Define learning objectives, which we will come back to very soon, and you could perhaps use a model for your instructional design. For example, the ADDIE model stands for Analyze, Design, Develop, Implement, and Evaluate it, so you have several phases in your development of your material. So, some takeaways. Training SREs is about building confidence and reducing imposter syndrome. It is not about a fire hose of information. That does not help. It's about hands-on exercise, because hands-on exercise actually give you more confidence. And the service reliability hierarchy gives a useful framework for building and running an SRE training program. So here you have it, the SRE training takeaways. Then there is one last thing. I said something about learning objectives. We have a term that's called ASBAT. And an ASBAT stands for a student should be able to. So you create your learning objectives with action words. You do not say, after the class, a student should be able to know how to set up a database. No, after the course, a student should be able to set up a database. So action words and something that you can actually verify. And with that, thanks to all of the core team and our core team lead and our volunteers. We see Ohad there and
Sammy,
other volunteers. Thank you all. Without you, this is not possible.
And I would say as well, I mean, there's a small team of 7 here, but again, there's a small army of volunteers that are really behind, like, pulling this off every month. So again, we're fueled by volunteers and could not deliver this without them. So for those in the audience, thank you very much for all that you do. And yep. All right, just wanted to throw 2 quick things into the mix here at the request of our programs team. Just wanted to highlight Kickstart. So it's a global online coding competition. If anybody wants to get into the mix, g.co/Kickstart. And then prizes, stop by the Google booth. And actually, if you Google/SREcon, you can play and win some fabulous prizes with a raffle on Friday. And with that, do we have time for Q&A? Okay, cool. Thank you. Nice for them. Awkward silence. No. Oh, Kurt's got it.
And we have a first question.
What questions do you ask to assess confidence?
So we basically ask, how confident are you in doing specific tasks? Like, you can ask in general, how confident did you feel about doing your job before the training? How confident do you feel after? And then you can also do it on a task basis.
Yeah, so for example, you could say something like, do you know how to bring down a job? Answer A, I have no clue what you're talking about. Answer B, I could look it up in the documentation. Answer C, yeah, I could probably do it with some help. Answer D, yes, I know how to do that by heart. And answer E, I could teach people to do this. And none of the answers are wrong. If someone says, I have no clue what you mean, then that is fine too. It just means that you have something to learn.
And we do look at that over time. So you can assess like before training, after training, and then 1 month, 6 months out.
Hi, can I ask about how many people you going through the program? For example, 1 year or something like that?
Wait, and where are you? I'm like, oh, there you are, thank you. Like, there you are. We really can't give precise numbers, I would say, but like we train a lot of people in the hundreds.
Hundreds per month? Or?
No, oh, per month, sorry. No, I think, JC, you were saying like, maybe 100 a month.
Yeah, maybe 100 a month.
Thanks.
No problem.
Anyone else?
In the back there.
Ah, there we go.
Breu.
I wish I could run, but I broke my kneecap.
Meet them halfway, yeah. Okay, cool. Hi.
You mentioned during the talk, I believe, that you measure down the line if people actually have the behaviors that you teach. How did you manage to measure that?
So it's actually observing them in class. Like, do they get through the actual exercises? Like, so the instructors can see, like, are they, like, what tools are they using? Like, how are they actually approaching it? So it's less systematic, I guess, in that sense, like, because you're just, you can get approximation of, like, how many people are actually, like, getting through the exercises and, like, what approaches are they using to do it.
Okay, and did you look for a way to measure if it also happens after the class in reality? Because that's much harder to measure, right?
It is, so indeed it is. I think looking at things like time to on-call, time to submit meaningful code, time to tackle various bugs or whatever. So there's different approaches, but there can be like confounding factors, like how much can you attribute to the training program versus
very noisy.
Things. Yeah, it's noisy data. So that's an aspiration. Like JC knows I love data, so it's an aspiration to get that. But
I would like to add one little anecdote, and that is that we have a couple of times had people from the monitoring team come and observe the classes because they wanted to see how people who have no clue what our UI looks like and how the monitoring works, how they would react to new changes in the monitoring system. And they, oh wow, we have some fresh people here. We never get fresh people to use our code. So yeah.
Yeah, so there's a side benefit there for other teams.
As I'm walking, I'm going to ask one, actually.
Okay.
So you start training people when they join, but I'm curious about how do you maintain the SRE mindset and like skills over time?
We have several programs for continued education. We have classes that people teach, but once a year we organize something called SRE EDU Annual Week of Education, or
awesome. Yes.
where we have round-the-clock classes. Last year we had some 80 classes that were taught from all our offices around the world, and there was always going on something somewhere in some time zone, which is recorded so that people in awkward time zones can still watch that.
And I would say, like, there's a commitment to SRE culture to the very top of the organization. So, like, people are walking the talk. So even beyond just training, like, it's steeped. Like, people steep in it from the very start and on an ongoing basis.
First of all, actually, thank you, Jennifer, and then JC for your time. I am actually working on the production, and we don't in our team we don't have a trainer or educators. Generally, actually, I train people, but at the same time, I have my work to do. How do you make a balance on productions and the trainers at the people at the same time, or do you have any advice?
So volunteers, our volunteers. So in every site that we have 3 sites. We have a number of deans who run the classes, who own the classes. They ask for volunteers. We want someone to teach the logging class, we want someone to teach the blah class, and so on. And we have one of them from Dublin here, Ohad. And then the people who do the actual training, they go to a training that we teach, a trainer that explains why the classes are the way they are, and how the breakages work. And then they regularly teach this, and this is like a commitment of twice a quarter or 3 times a quarter you teach a class.
Yeah.
And the reward is important.
Yeah. And I would say, like, it's knowledge about distributed systems is distributed, so not surprisingly, so being able to leverage those volunteer subject matter experts is really useful, and the fact that Google, like, encourages people to do this, I think, is pretty helpful. So we, like, touch wood, like, we haven't had an issue recruiting enough volunteers to run the program, but yeah, we're fueled by volunteers.
Now on to our last question.
Last question. No pressure.
Sorry. Do you have any special considerations for remote trainings versus in-person class training?
Yeah, so that's because, yes. So I would say, like, we focus on in-person training early, so for our new hires in particular, because we think it's important to form a cohort, you know, for people to not feel like I'm in this alone, like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? So we invest heavily in sort of the in-person training up front, but then later on, like, so for our going on call collection and the annual week of education, it's largely VC-based and a sprinkle of self-study mixed in. Yeah.
But we noticed that is less well received as the live classes, which also have the breakages, and it's there that the confidence building happens in the beginning. So yeah.
Yeah. So but it's always a trade-off, because also managers, like, we find that the sort of patience that managers have for, like, their people to be in training, it's, like, inversely proportional to how long they've been at the company. So patient up front, but the longer they're there, it's like, hey, you can't be taking a week out for training. So it's a balance, and we think we get the biggest sort of bang for the buck by, you know, investing in people when they're new.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.